things for us. 1 out of every 3 bites of food that we eat is pollinated by honeybees. So you have them to thank for 1 out of every 3 bites of food that you take. We also have bees. Honeybees will also produce things like beeswax, which we use in different beauty products. We'll use that in shoe polish, things like that, where we are actually having so much interaction with these tiny little insects that a lot of time we forget exist. So I'm going to have you guys shout out how many types of bees, not honeybees, just any kind of bee, exists in North America. It's not 1. So there's
9.
9. Okay, so we have 9 photos here. Got a lot.
Sour.
35.
535, was that the number? Very specific. I like it.
No, 35.
35.
My favorite bee is a honeybee.
Okay, so we're getting a lot of great guesses. Actually, it's a lot more than all those numbers. There are 4,000 clases de abejas en Norteamérica. Como nosotros conocemos la abeja de miel, pero hay una variedad grande de clases de abejas. Y esas clases diferentes juegan un rol súper importante de nuestro medio ambiental por la polinización. Y cada clase de abeja es súper, súper importante, como les dije, por el medio ambiente, porque están haciendo la polinización. Here we have one type of local pollinator called a sweat bee. So this is a bright green bee that you'll see kind of on hot days. Sometimes they come around humans because they love salty liquids. Why they're called the sweat bee. Here we have a mason bee. That's the kind of bee that actually eats wood in addition to pollen.
Annie, you stopped sharing your screen.
Oh no!
I did that on accident, sorry.
Oh. No worries.
Wait, was that a bee, like a little bee on top of the?
Yeah. So these are 2 different types of bees. Sorry about not sharing my screen, y'all. I'll go back a little bit so you can see. So here we have some varieties. We have this one that's bright green. We have a mason bee, and they chew on wood as part of the way that they make their home and they make their nest, actually. This is another kind of local bee that we'll interact with. I think this one looks very ghost-like and a little spooky, personally. This is actually not a bee, it's a fly that pretends to be a bee. The reason that this fly pretends to be a bee is because a lot of predators or natural enemies of the fly are going to, if they think that it's actually a bee, bees are naturally going to have stingers. So that's a really, really good defense mechanism. That way, if any, big bullies come around and try to attack them, they will have that stinger as a way to defend themselves. And although this fly doesn't have a stinger, a lot of the bigger predators that maybe are hunting flies think that this little guy is a bee. So it's really just a really good imposter. Here's a leafcutter bee. This is a type of bee that uses leaves as a part of its way to make its nest. And then here we are back to all these different types of local bees that we are going to find in North America, those 4,000 different types. So I kind of mentioned it before, but what unifies all these different kinds of bees? What do they have in common? Besides the fact that they can fly and that they can sting.
They both are on flowers.
Yeah, exactly. They're all going to flowers and pollinating. And what they're doing when they pollinate is they're actually allowing these flowers to reproduce and flourish. So when you bring pollen from one flower to another flower, that enables that flower to pass on its genetic line so that next year, all those beautiful dandelions will continue to bloom, because if they weren't pollinated, then I'm using dandelions as an example, but say you have a cluster of beautiful dandelions. If you didn't pollinate those, then it won't actually be able to continue next year and continue. So we are going to talk about why honeybees are a little different than the rest of these local native pollinators. ¿Alguien tiene, bueno, yo voy a decir a ustedes por qué la abeja de miel es algo diferente que las otras abejas que encontramos aquí en Norteamérica. Hay dos cosas. La primera cosa es que abejas de miel son de una comunidad. Ellos son sociales, viven en como una ciudad muy pequeña, en una colmena. Normalmente las otras clases de abejas que encontramos son abejas solitarias. Entonces, esas clases de abejas no interactúan con otros polinadores, other pollinators, excuse me. Y tenemos esa clase de abeja de miel especial que vive con una comunidad de abejas apoyándoles. Y la otra cosa que es diferente es que ellos producen miel. Cada clase de abeja no produce miel. El único que produce el líquido de oro, miel, que nosotros comemos y encantamos, es la abeja de miel. Es el único calidad que lleva esa clase de abeja. Y como humanos, nosotros interactuamos, nosotros tenemos una historia súper grande de estar enamorados con la abeja. We have been obsessed with them for thousands of years. This actually goes way back to Egyptian times. So over 5,000 years ago, we have been obsessed with honeybees and worshiping them. Durante el tiempo de los egipcianos ancianos, ellos creyeron que la abeja era un representante del dios del sol, se llamaba el dios rey. Creyeron que miel era de las lágrimas del dios y llevaron miel y otros productos de la colmena en una variedad de maneras. En cosas medicales, por ejemplo, honey is really antibacterial, actually, so they would use honey to help heal wounds. Beeswax was used in dental work, so if you guys go to the dentist and get your teeth brushed or maybe have a cavity, back in the day, in ancient Egypt, they would actually fill those cavities with beeswax. So pretty crazy to think about. And this is just another crazy thing is honeybees were held in such high regard that the explorers, when they went back to explore in the pyramids, they would go and find these massive empty vessels or these massive jars that would just be filled with this mysterious kind of crystallized thing on the inside. When they actually sent what was inside of these large jars to laboratories, they discovered that it was honey. And not only was it honey, but it was still good. You can actually eat honey throughout it's never going to spoil, pure honey. It has a lot of antibacterial properties, which means that no bad bacteria can grow in honey. And today we are still using honey or these beeswax products in a similar fashion. Aquí tenemos una vela de la cena de abejas, o tenemos el jabón de abeja, o chapstick de abeja también, tenemos alguna forma en que podemos utilizar los productos de la colmena. So even back in 1622, we're going to fast forward from Egyptian times to when the settlers first came to Jamestown, Virginia. In 1622 was not only when the settlers first arrived, but that was also the first time that honeybees arrived in North America. And what happened is the settlers brought over honeybees and introduced all these new species that had never been in this part of the world before. They not only brought with them honeybees, but they brought things like apples, cherries, apple trees, other goods that were successful in Europe that they were hoping they could bring with them to the New World as a way to continue their success in agriculture that they had back then. But over time, what happened was these settlers brought all these honeybees over, and inevitably, they're kind of wild animals. So they're not totally just going to stay exactly where the settlers want them to do. Or where the settlers want them to stay. So over time, the hives started to break off from the settlers and reproduce in their own way. Aquí tenemos una colmena en la naturaleza. Como les dije, como se rompieron la cadena de los conquistadores, pues. Tenemos una colmena en la naturaleza. Normalmente las abejas encontraron un hueco o en un árbol o un espacio guardado de la lluvia y del viento donde pueden vivir con la reina y lo demás de la población en la colmena.
Sorry, Annie, your screen isn't being shared anymore.
Oh my gosh, why does that keep happening?
I think maybe students can also share their screen, so when they do that, then...
Oh, okay. All right, let me...
I think they said that the spotlight isn't able to be recorded.
Yeah, students, please don't spotlight each other right now, because then Annie's screen gets unshared, okay? So let's not do that right now. Thank you.
Can you guys see my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So here we have our hive in nature, but we have also tried to find other ways that we can keep beehives. And aquí tenemos un ejemplo de los egipcianos ancianos. Ellos utilizaron algunas fibras naturales y atado junto y colgando de algunos árboles. Ellos utilizaron algunos palas o algo para sacar el miel y otros recursos. Como el siglo XVII, tenemos aquí una manera de fibras naturales atado junto, pero aquí empezaron a hacer la apicultura por la tierra. So this is a kind of a new era where people were starting to bring beehives on the ground rather than having them suspended up in trees, like we saw originally in the wild. And that brings us to today, the kinds of hives that we work with now. So the way that we work with our beehives now is having these movable frames. And as a beekeeper, it's my role to inspect the hive, see what's happening in the hive. And this is kind of the way that I can manipulate what's happening on the inside of the hive and see how they're doing health-wise. Does that make sense to everyone so far?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Yes.
We have some questions, Annie. I don't know when you want to answer. Do you want to keep it at the end or during the presentation?
Let's ask some, let's take a moment and I'll do 5 minutes for questions. And then if they aren't going to be answered later in the presentation, I'll answer them now.
So Jennifer, I see your hand is up. ¿Tienes alguna pregunta?
Sí, ¿verdad que como en every beehive hay como una reina? No sé si es cierto, pero como tienen que sacar la reina primero y después todas las otras abejas la siguen, porque como la
Sí,
reina.
exactamente. Bueno, voy a hablar un poco más de la reina en la presentación, pero la reina tiene un olor especial y la reina es la mamá de todas las abejas en la colmena y todas las abejas conocen el olor de ella y la siguen hasta que se mueren. They are so devoted to their queen, who is actually their mother. And each one of these hives has their own queen, and only one. No hay más de una reina, solo hay una. Si hay más, no es una reina. Entonces, cada colmena lleva una reina y ella es la mamá de todas las abejas en la colmena. Are there any more questions for right now?
No.
Okay.
What do you do when you get the honey out? How do you make the bees go away?
You eat it.
I'll talk a little.
Let's eat.
Question for the very end. So hold on to that question, and then once the presentation is done, remind me again to explain how we get the honey out of the hive, because it's a very exciting process, and I'll get into it a little bit more.
We have one question about y el rey, so the king.
Bueno, la verdad es que no hay un rey en las colmenas, solo hay la reina. Pero vamos a hablar el rol que juega algunos. We're going to talk a little bit more about the power dynamics in the hive. So kind of how there's the queen and how there are male bees in the hive, but they aren't the king. And I'll explain
So
why.
no king.
No king.
They always need a king, though.
Well, they have a very strong queen. And the way that I think about it is not as much as it's the queen's kingdom, is I think of as the queen as doing all the work for the greater good of the hive. We have this mindset as people. We aren't bees. We don't know how they are. So we always kind of have this mentality of the queen is the one in charge. She is the boss. Pero ella, la verdad es que ella no es la jefa de la colmena. La jefa de la colmena es la población de todas las abejas ahí. So the entire population of the hive, they are the ones that are deciding what's happening in the hive. The queen is just there as a mother to keep producing and replacing the population. Entonces voy a hablar un poco más de eso. ¿Tenemos más preguntas para ahorita? I'm going to assume no, because I didn't get any answers on that one. But so here is actually what we would see from the outside if we walked up to a hive today. This is what most of the hives look like on the rooftops where I work in Washington, D.C. And here we have the front of the hive, donde vamos a ver la mayoría de la acción de afuera, que podemos ver de afuera. Aquí están llegando algunos abejas y saliendo, es la entrada. Y afuera no podemos ver nada que está pasando adentro de la caja ahí, adentro de esa comunidad de abejas, de la ciudad que está viviendo ahí, porque es una ciudad vibrante y muy, muy viva ahí. Y vamos a hablar un poco más sobre el dinámico que está adentro de eso. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit about bees and wasps, because a lot of times there is a little bit of a difference there. So while this is one of our beehives and what you'll find honeybee hives to look like, ¿alguien sabe qué clase de colmena es esa?
It looks scary.
It looks a little scary, huh?
It's a wasp than, or how do you call it?
Yeah, exactly. Great guess. It's a wasp nest. So here we have a honeybee and a wasp. So the honeybee is here on the left side of your screen. She is golden in color and golden, nice golden and black. She's very fluffy. She's covered in all of these micro hairs. She actually has thousands and thousands of hairs all over her body, little tiny hairs. And these tiny hairs are great for her to pick up pollen. So as we started talking about in the beginning, it's her job to go out and pollinate. So what she does is, using these tiny hairs that are covering her body, she is able to cover her body in those different pollen grains. Also, something to note is that she, while she can sting, and she has the ability to sting, she has a fish hook like stinger. So if a honeybee actually stings you, they die. What happens is their stinger gets stuck in your skin, and they disembowel themselves. They are not able to keep living after they sting.
Say if like they sting you, so after that they can die, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if a honeybee stings you, they die. And the honeybees know that, so they have no interest in stinging you. They don't want to die. It's they want to be living for their hive, for that greater good of the population that I was talking about.
Sometimes they don't die.
Well, that's the thing. If they don't die, then it's not a honeybee. So the wasps right next to the honeybee, that we see that bright yellow color, they're really different than honeybees and wasps, and they actually have a smooth stinger. So what happens is they don't die if they sting you. So honeybees, if they sting you, they die, but that wasp can sting you again and again, or it can sting you and then leave you in peace and keep living. So if you get stung by a wasp or by something and it stings you again, or it flies away, it probably wasn't a honeybee because those honeybees can't live after they sting you. One other thing I always like to mention as well is wasps are actually carnivorous. So honeybees, they are interested in pollen and nectar. So they just want to go out to the flowers and pollinate and slurp up some nectar. But
Wasps just enjoy hurting people.
I wouldn't say they enjoy hurting people, but they definitely can have. Well, they're just a lot more defensive, because what happens is a lot of wasp nests also are actually underground. And what will happen is, if I were living underground and someone walked above my house, I'd be pretty angry too. So these wasps kind of have this ability to sting and be more defensive, because they live in spots where they are more at risk for larger predators like ourselves to interact with them. So they are going to be more defensive. And one other thing that I'll say about wasps is another reason why they are a little bit more defensive is because they are actually carnivores. While they can eat pollen and nectar, they also enjoy eating grubs and larvae and other small insects to help feed themselves and their young. So just a little bit different between bees and wasps. And a lot of times we'll see a wasp and maybe get stung and always think it's the honeybee, when that's not really the case. I will also add one more thing, is these two bees are also social insects, which is very different from a lot of the 4,000 other bees that we might see. Does anyone, and maybe some people have seen a structure like this around where you live. Does anyone know what this actually is? And this is more going back to those 4,000 other native and local bees that I talked about in the beginning.
Yeah, I think I do.
What is it?
It's like where people want honey.
Where people want honey? Okay.
Or
Other
where they come together like a hive.
Okay.
I've seen that, but I just always thought that's what The bees go.
Okay, so you guys we've got some really good answers in there. So what this is it is a home for bees. It's exactly that, but it's not a home for wasps or honeybees. It's actually a home for all those other 4,000 bees that we talked about.
So like different kind of bees.
Yeah, exactly. So all these different kinds of bees that we'll see. So like a leaf cutter bee, this is a great example. They'll actually take leaves and put the leaves inside those long tubes and create these little cocoons that they will put their young into. So here we have this special cocoon this is just kind of a side view. This top picture is a side view of if you cut that tube in half. And we can see that there's a bunch of pollen that bee tucked in there. And then this little cocoon is actually just covered in leaves. So what that bee will do is make a special cocoon, stuff it with pollen that her eggs will then eat until they hatch. So now we have, I just think this is like an adorable photo. Pero aquí tenemos un ejemplo de otro.
They're hatching.
Yeah, right? They look like they're hiding. But
Yeah. How they do it?
So what they'll do to get out is they'll use those tiny little their jaws. Ahí tenemos las mandíbulas y van a masticar poco a poco todo el polen y todas las cosas que están allá para que nacen de allá. Y de ahí ellas empiezan todo el proceso de nuevo a cosechar el polen y a construir otra casita, a crecer otros niños o otras niñas. I'm hearing some questions, but I think it's cutting in and out. Do you want to chat your question in and I'll see what it says? Okay. So I'm going to ask you guys, you don't need to unmute yourself. I'm kind of curious. You guys can just use the chat feature. How many bees do you think live in one beehive? We're back to honeybees now. Estamos hablando
1 million. 1
1
million.
million. Okay, we got 1 million. Any other numbers we're hearing? 1 million's a lot of bees.
2,000.
2,000.
200.
200.
3,000.
3,000. Okay. Let me see if I'm going to double check the chat. Okay, we got
52.
Okay. So 162, that was a very specific number. But the number of bees in this hive is around 50,000 bees. So cada colmena lleva 50,000 abejas. Y el tamaño de la población de abejas está cambiando durante la estación. Durante la primavera hay muchas flores y por eso la verdad es que la abeja es como una campesina. Va a cosechar todo el polen y todo el néctar que hay en su barrio. Y lo que hace es que si hay más población, hay más abejas en una colmena, pueden ir a cosechar todos los recursos que hay disponible a la colmena. Y es algo para saber que el tamaño, la población está cambiando durante la estación del año y depende de la estación. Aquí tenemos la entrada de la abeja, de la colmena, disculpe. Y aquí vamos a ver las abejas más viejas saliendo y llegando a la colmena. And this is really donde va a haber toda la acción de la colmena. Si yo estoy al lado de una colmena, no voy a ver nada de abejas, pero si yo veo la entrada, sí voy a ver un poco acción, un poco alguna cosa pasando ahí. But for the most part, if you walk up to a beehive, you're really not going to see a lot of things happening. You're just going to see things right by that entrance as bees come and go. But they will go up to 3 miles away from their hive to go get food. So it's not like around the hive you see a lot of those 50,000 bees hanging out. Pero debajo del techo va a haber todas las abejas. Aquí es una foto de cuando abre la colmena. Está viva con abeja adentro. Aquí puede ver todos las trabajadores allí y cómo están interactuando. So they are just going across these different, we call them frames, these movable wood planks. And the bees are going to, this is just the inside look at the busyness that's happening inside the hive. Y aquí tenemos la estrella de la colmena, y no es el muchacho aquí, Alex, pero se llama Alex el muchacho, pero es la abeja ahí en el nariz de él. Y esa foto es un ejemplo para demostrar a ustedes que la abeja de miel es muy dócil. Ella no tiene ella no quiere picar una persona. La verdad es en el interés de ella a estar viva y a no picar una persona. So a lot of the photos that you guys are going to see as far as beekeeping goes, you're going to see us wearing not a lot of equipment. And that's just because it's not as necessary as we think it is sometimes. As I said, these bees, they aren't interested in actually stinging us. They're just interested in doing what they need to do in the hive. Y aquí tenemos, voy a hablar un poco más de la estrella, la trabajadora, la que hace la mayoría del trabajo. Y ella es una hembra. La trabajadora, the worker bee, son hembra. Y ella es 900% de la población de la colmena. So of those 50,000 bees, 40,000 of them, I'm sorry, that wasn't not correct. It'd be a little bit more than, it'd be 47.5 thousand of them will be honeybees and will be female. And they are going to be doing all of this work. Y ella hace todo de ese trabajo durante 30 días de vida. Solo tiene 30 días de hacer todas las responsabilidades que llevan la abeja trabajadora. Y ya vamos a hablar no del rey, pero del muchacho que vive en la colmena. Se llama un drone. So a drone is just another fancy word for a male bee. He is a little fatter than the worker bee. You can see that. Yeah?
So do like kid bees like have a stinger?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. But that's a really great question because the worker bees will actually have stingers, but the drone, so the male bee here in the middle, he doesn't have a stinger. And the reason that he doesn't have a stinger is because it's not up to him to defend the hive. It's up to him to pass on the genetic diversity of the hive. So if the hive wants to reproduce, he would inseminate a queen from a neighboring hive. But other than that, he really doesn't do much as far as defense. He doesn't pollinate as much. He sometimes will help regulate the temperature of the hive. And I'll talk about temperature regulation a little bit more and why that's so important. But the drone cannot sting, unlike the worker bee who is born with a stinger and can sting throughout her life. But one fun fact about a worker bee is that actually when they are young, they have really, really weak venom glands. So if you get stung by a baby bee versus an adult or an older bee that's 30 days old versus its first day of life out of hatching out of the cell, it would hurt a lot more if you got stung by an older bee than a younger bee. Y la última jugadora, tenemos la reina, y solo hay una reina en cada colmena, y ella tiene la habilidad para picar, pero solo cuando ella nace de su célula. Durante su vida, ella no pica a nadie después de eso. Pero ella y la reina es alguien muy importante en la colmena, y eso es porque ella es la madre de todas las abejas en la colmena. Cada vez que algunas abejas se mueren, es la responsabilidad de la reina a reemplazar la población. So those worker bees only live 30 days. So it's really important to keep, and we have 50,000 bees in this hive. So it's so important that if every 30 days you're losing all your workforce, you're losing all the workers, you need to make sure that you have a lot of new bees that are going to be born. And it's the queen bee's job to be the mother. And so she is laying eggs to replace that population.
I have a question.
Yeah. What's your question?
Like, why does the queen have like a bigger thing in the back
That's a
than
great
the others?
So the reason that she has such a large abdomen is, and that's called an abdomen, so this last little part of her. And the reason it's so large is because it's filled with eggs. She can lay her body weight in eggs every single day. So she's always going to be laying more eggs to replace that population. I'll also add, so the queen bee doesn't live for 30 days. She actually can live for 3 years. So it's her role. There's only going to be that one mother of the hive, and she's going to have that role of leadership of the queen for a long period of time. And that's why her abdomen is so much larger, is because it's filled with eggs. And here we have another photo of a queen bee interacting with some of the worker bees. And the worker bees will actually take care of the queen because the bees know how important it is to continually replace and make sure that they have a healthy mother, so that they have a really, really healthy.
Hey, Miss, I have a question.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yes.
Miss, I have a question.
How long?
I was the one who asked first.
Yeah, let him.
Yeah. Okay. So how do the bee, like when they poop, is it honey?
No. So
Oh, thank God. I was about to say what?
bee poop is not
Coming out of there.
but
You never know.
bees will actually never poop in their hive, which is pretty crazy. They'll always, and for the first 2 weeks of their life, they actually don't poop.
2 weeks?
So
They don't poop.
right?
Yeah, so the first 2 weeks of a bee's life, they can't
They
actually
pee?
fly. So the bees
no,
should not poop for the first 2 weeks of their life.
I got a question.
Okay. Next
How
question.
many babies can a queen make?
So the queen can make up to 2,000 babies a day.
So what are the will it be all girls in our hive or just one girl and all boys?
So it's mostly girls in that hive. So all the worker bees
How do you know the difference?
are girls. So you can
Yeah,
tell.
how can you know the difference?
So
How do you know the difference between a woman
Oh,
bee?
because the ladies bees got more hair and the boy bees don't.
So yeah, let's look at this photo really quick. You can see, so in the middle here, we have a male bee. And you see he has really big eyes. He's a little bit rounder. He's just kind of a chunky boy.
Yeah,
And
but they're like up far. It's not like looking like that.
Yeah, so but when you can actually, trust me, you definitely notice the difference because the way that the drone's eyes are, and they're physically quite larger than the worker bees. So you can tell you can really tell who's different when you're looking into a hive of bees. If there are, what a male or what a female is, or where the queen is, or what the queen looks like. And then it's mostly going to be females in the hive. All right, I'll take one more question, and then I'm going to keep going, and then we'll save all the questions for the end.
You've had your hand up the whole time, so Bayani can ask this question, please. Bayani?
How are queen bees selected?
So that is a really, really great question. And the way that the queen bee is selected so each bee has each queen emits a special smell or pheromone, and the rest of the bees have an amazing sense of smell, better than dogs. And what they can do is when they smell their queen, the queen that has a stronger that has a stronger pheromone, or that if they like that smell, that her particular pheromone better, she will be the queen selected. And then the smell of that pheromone makes the rest of the bees know that they have a queen and they don't need to worry about having a new mother, if that makes sense. I hope that made some sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I do.
Yep.
Okay.
I got one, miss.
Okay, I'll take one more, and then I'm gonna keep going, and then we'll do.
Wait, Rachel said one question, and then we'll just move on.
Okay,
That was the one question, so let's just move on.
Okay, Nathaniel and Amina, you haven't asked a question. You can ask a question.
Bro, miss.
No, let him go.
No, okay, fine. Amina can go then.
Okay, so why when bees? I mean, when you have perfume on, why does bees come up close to you when you
So you smell like a flower. It's because, like I said, they have this really, really good sense of smell. And one of the reasons they have such a good sense of smell is because they can smell flowers, and they not only can see the flower, but they smell it, and they'll be attracted to it. And they'll try to figure out where they can get their pollen and nectar. So if you wear perfume, a lot of time it's made from different extracts from flowers. And we're trying to smell like a flower when we put perfume on ourselves. So a lot of times honeybees smell that too, and they're kind of trying to figure out where the flower is. If I go beekeeping, for example, I can't put perfume on because then all the bees are just looking for the flowers on me, and it's just not. It's just, you just don't want to do that. So sometimes bees will be attracted to the smell of flowers in perfume. So we're going to pause questions for now, and I'm going to talk just about the worker bee, and then I will open up a solid chunk of time for more questions for everybody, okay? And then, yes, and then we'll do 10 minutes of questions at the end, okay? So, ya estamos hablando solo de la trabajadora. Ella empieza de un huevo así, es como un granito de arroz, el tamaño de arroz.
Do honey Cheerios have real honey?
That's a good question. I don't know if honey Cheerios have real honey, but I'll get back to you. I'll let Ms. Vasquez know to let you know. So the worker bee will start as 3 days as a little egg, and de ahí ella empieza a ser un larva después de 4 días. Ella es una larva y está comiendo algo que se llama jalea real. Lleva muchos nutrientes y comida para la cría aquí, la larva. Y eso, después de 21 días, va a salir la célula. So after 21 days, the bee is going to come out of her cell, scratch her way out, and start playing all these different roles that she will play in the hive. Durante la 30 días de vida de la trabajadora, ella va a tener mucho rol en la colmena. La primera 2 semanas de su vida, y solo vive 4 semanas. Entonces, las primeras 2 semanas, la abeja no puede volar. Entonces, como ella no puede volar, se queda en la colmena, pero se queda en la colmena trabajando bien dura. Empieza la primera 4 días de su vida. Ella es una lavadora, limpiadora. Ella se va a cada célula a sacar algunos, basura. She's going to take out any kind of liquids or things that weren't supposed to be in the hive, dust, debris, little things like that, making sure that it's all crisp and clean. Bees are very, very hygienic creatures. So as you're talking about bee poop, they won't poop in their hive. So during the first 2 weeks of their life, they're not going to poop in their hive, and they won't leave it. Después de las primeras 3-4 días de vida, ella va a ser una enfermera. Es el trabajo de la enfermera a cuidar toda la cría o brood. So all of these are baby bees that are soon going to be born. And it's the honeybee's job to make sure that they are being taken care of and fed with that royal jelly that I mentioned. So that's kind of just like how baby animals will nurse from their mom. The royal jelly is that same, provides the same food for the young bees as well. And actually the nurse bees tienen un rol súper importante porque ellos se calienta la colmena. It's like the baby bees need to be at 95 degrees Fahrenheit, so they need to be really, really warm. And it's the nurse bee's job to keep the hive temperature up at 95 degrees. Then there is after about a week and a half of being a nurse bee, the bee will spend around 5 days being an architect. She can produce wax from her abdomen, like we're seeing here. Y de ahí, ella tiene la cera y con enzimas de la boca y las mandíbulas, ella forma el panal que vemos aquí. Y enzimas, so enzymes, helps break something down, make it easier to work with a little bit. Y todo de la estructura del panal es la estructura para todo en la colmena. Allí se guarda la comida de néctar o polen o miel, pero también ahí se cuida todo la cría, todos los bebés. Y es súper importante. Antes de que la abeja se vaya a volar, a cosechar el néctar y polen, ella va a ser un abanico, pues. So she's going to use her wings to be a fan and be a temperature regulator. So as I said, 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So the hive is going to stay at that temperature, and these bees play that role and are able to heat the hive. They heat the hive, and they also cool the hive by bringing air flow through and keeping the baby bees nice and warm. So then finally, after all of this, those first 2 weeks of life, one of a honeybee's older sister will pull her aside and teach her the waggle dance. And the waggle dance is how honeybees are able to figure out where food is in relation to their hive and how to find their way home. Because they'll go up to 3 miles away to get more food. and they need to find their way back to their tiny little beehive. So I'm going to show you just a quick video of that waggle dance and show you guys just kind of the little dance that the bees will do so that they can figure out how to go get food and find their way back home. And here we go.
Honeybees have some fascinating abilities, among them being able to communicate by performing a unique dance. It informs hive mates where a newly discovered food source is located. Every cycle of this waggle dance roughly describes the shape of the figure 8. Let's rewind and look in more detail. The bee only waggles on a part of its route, the straight run, indicated here by the waved line. The secret lies in the direction of the straight run, or to be more precise, in the angle between the straight run and the perpendicular, which in this case is 90 degrees to the left. This tells the other bees that food is available 90 degrees to the left of the sun. If the angle is...
So we don't need to know exactly how the waggle dance works. We don't need to translate the waggle dance and find our way home, but it is pretty cool that that's how bees, one of the ways that bees communicate is literally by having a dance-off. I just think that's pretty wild. So, ya que tenemos la abeja quien aprendió cómo bailar, ya puede irse a cosechar el néctar. And she is well equipped to do that. So as I talked about those tiny little micro hairs on her body, también ella tiene una lengua especial, es como una paja. Tiene esa lengua especial muy, muy larga y se llama un proboscis. That's the scientific term for it. And it's just a special long, super, super long straw-like tongue that bees can use to get into the very, very bottom of some plants. And when she arrives to one of these flowers, she's going to cover her whole body in pollen and just get totally covered, and all those micro hairs are going to be covered in the pollen grains. And what she'll actually do is, you can see at the base of this photo, she takes all those little different bits of pollen, and we call them pollen baskets, and she'll sweep it all together, clean herself off, and have it all mashed together into one spot on her back legs. And it kind of lets her ease up her hands a little bit so that she can keep flying around and carry her load nice and easily. It'll actually take, she can carry up to 2 times her body weight in resources. So imagine just schlepping twice your own body weight in your book bag or something back and forth to school. It's pretty crazy. And she'll interact with a lot of other pollinators along the way. Here we have a butterfly who is also using that proboscis, that straw-like tongue, to slurp up some of the nectar. So, and all these different pollinators have a really, really important role to play. So here she is now arriving after her long adventure out from the hive and bringing all of her hard work back to her hive. Y ya estamos terminando poco a poco, pero ella va a hacer todo de ese trabajo without us asking her to do it. She's going to go do this work for the neighborhood and really help these flowers continue to bloom and flourish without us asking anything of her. And our agrochemicals, so this, we use a lot of pesticides in a lot of things that we do, and we rely on honeybees to pollinate our food. They're actually responsible for around 2/3 of our food, while they pollinate directly 1 out of every 3 bites we eat. There's things like alfalfa, or food that animals eat that we don't eat, or that animals eat that we then later eat, that are reliant on honeybees for pollinating. So there's a lot of ripple effects from using a lot of harmful chemicals, not only in agriculture, but in lots of other ways in our life. So sometimes, using that wasp spray, that's very, that can be really, really bad. So just be really careful about the different ripple effects sometimes that chemicals that we use in our daily lives could maybe have. And this is the end of everything. I'm going to open it up for questions for you guys, but I just hope that you guys got a lot out of this today. And I hope you guys go home and maybe have a little conversation about the honeybees and kind of the work that they do. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let us hear some. Does anyone have any questions? I'll do questions until
I have a question. Remember me.
Okay, I don't know who's saying me, but let's do it.
Okay, how about this? Students that have a question, raise your hand, and then we will pick you from the participants that are raising your hand, okay? So Nathaniel has a question. You can ask your question.
Yeah, so how do the mother have all those kids? Do they go to each man when they're mating, or they just do it by themselves?
So actually what happens is the queen only mates once in her life. She mates with a drone, a male bee from another hive that's far away. And she'll only do that one time. And then she never needs to mate again. And she,
What?
Yeah.
5,000 kids? Don't you need like a lot of men?
Nope, not the queen. She will mate with, she'll mate with a few drones on one flight and then never again. And then she will just stay in the hive for the rest of her life.
Dang, that's sad.
Okay, Alberto, you have a question?
Yes, Miss. How are you today, Miss?
I'm doing great, Alberto. How are you?
Okay. That's all my question, Miss.
What kind of question was that?
Okay, Jennifer, you have a question?
It's a question.
That was not a question. So
It's
I
a
wanted to
question.
add on.
It's a weird one, but it's still a question.
Okay.
So I wanted to add on Nathaniel's question.
Oh.
So for us, right, we have different sexualities, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if the bees kind of like us with the sexualities or not?
So that's a really, really good question. And I think that that's something where bees, they are naturally going to do whatever instincts they have. So I think humans, sexuality, it's also a lot of instincts, how we feel. And bees are similar in that they feel the need to fulfill or to act a certain way or play a certain role in the hive. So I think similar to us, bees can do the same.
Communicate.
Ari?
Like say no, but like if the person is like the bee is far away from the other bee.
So that's a great question. And they can't communicate long distance. So if they don't have, any good way of talking to their sisters on the other side of a field. But what they'll do is a lot of times when they get back to the hive, another way that they'll communicate other than just dancing is they'll actually kiss each other. That's a really, really big way that they communicate. And they'll kiss each other, and it's like a sister kiss. It's like, and they will actually share smells and food when they kiss like that. And there's a special scientific term for it called trophallaxis, and that is a really, really important way that bees also communicate as well.
Okay, Eric, you have a question?
How do you know these facts?
What was that?
How do you know all about this?
Yeah, I studied it, and I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about the bees, working with them, just kind of studying, taking the time to learn about this.
More than one animal, like a bee animal.
Okay.
So more things.
Hannah, you've already asked a lot of questions. Let's let some of the students that have not ask their questions yet, and then we can go back to you, okay? So Eric, can you ask your question?
You told me to remind you. How do you get the honey?
Yes, great question, Eric. So what you do when you get the honey out of the hives is you have to, so we have these movable frames. So I will remove these heavy frames of, let me grab one for you and I'll show you. We
I
have,
can't see.
we have these frames. And
You
this,
don't have your camera on.
oh, my camera isn't on. Oh my gosh, I thought my camera was on this whole time. I'm so sorry, everybody. So we have, this is just a regular frame. We have these in, this isn't built out with any beeswax, but what would happen is if this were in a hive, it'd be built out with beeswax and filled with honey. And then we take it off, we shake the bees off of it, and we remove it off site and put it in something that will spin it super, super quickly, and that'll actually whip all of the honey out of the cells, and then we'll be able to filter it.
Okay, Alicia, you had a question, or is your hand down?
In the U.S. Yeah, Miss, I had a question. Is honey the only thing they eat, or is like they like eat something else?
That's a great question. So they actually eat not only honey, but they eat nectar, which is what honey comes from. Actually, nectar, honey comes from nectar, which is something that flowers provide. It's just water and sugar, really. And then they also will eat pollen. Pollen is where they get their protein from. So pollen is how honeybees are going to get any of the things, like we would eat maybe a steak or some chicken or eggs, something like that for protein. Pollen is the bee's source of protein.
So they don't only eat, honey.
No, they don't just eat honey. They eat other things as well.
I mean, isn't like honey and nectar and pollen like the same thing? Because I mean, they all come from the same thing. So I mean,
they do all come from the same thing, but actually they're all really different. So pollen, like I said, it's a protein. So, and that is a slightly different, it's just a different makeup. It's not going to be the same thing. Just like how from a cow you can get milk or you can get a steak, the bees will get the same thing from, the bees can get very different things from flowers. Also, nectar and honey is really different because nectar has a really high water content. It's very watery. It's sugar water. And honey is actually very dehydrated sugar water. There's almost no water in honey.
so they don't only just eat that.
So they're going to eat honey, nectar, and pollen. They do all
Okay.
three of those things. Yeah.
All
They all
right.
come from flowers, though.
There's a lot of questions.
All right.
William, you have a question?
How long did it take you to not get scared of the bees no more? And how long did it take you to study them?
So I really started studying bees this past spring. And it's a little overwhelming at first to be in a beehive because there's a lot of bees, but I would say it took me to pass my time going into a beehive to realize that they are not trying to sting us. And it's really easy to be relaxed after a while because, like I said, they're not interested in stinging us.
So do bees eat meat?
No, bees do not eat meat.
But why?
Because they don't need to. Just like, certain animals rely on different things, just like how I was talking about cows with steaks and milk before, but cows just eat grass. So bees are just going to get all the nutrients and things that they need to survive based on what they can get out of flowers. All right. So I think those are most of the questions. I hope that you guys enjoyed the presentation today and kind of learning something about the bees. Thank you guys so much for paying such close attention and participating so much. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Friday. And thanks so much for spending some time with me, guys.
Bye.
Thank you so much for coming, Annie.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.